Good evening. We're here with Walid Nabhan, who's the author of the book Exodus of the Storks in its translated format. The book is just freshly delivered, and we're really happy to see this translation project coming through. It is, of course, the translation of L-Eżodu taċ-Ċikonji, which won the National Book Prize and was also awarded the European Literature Prize. The European Literature Prize was awarded to Walid, but this was one of the major works that were published before the award of that prize. We also have Mr. Nick Kent from Peter Owen Publishers. We're very happy to have you with us, Nick. And we're also very grateful for your work on this project. So I would like to start with you, in fact, Nick. Maybe you can introduce for us and for our audience the work of Peter Owen Publishers, your specialization, like a bit of a life story for us to become a bit familiar with you as a publisher.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you very clearly, but I think I got what the gist of what you were asking. This is our 70th year in the business of literary publishing, and it was started by this man. There's another new book here. So Peter Owen, Not a Nice Jewish Boy, which we haven't published, but tells the story of Peter and the company he founded in 1951 with some money that his mother lent him, and a lot of vision and enthusiasm. And in the intervening years, and particularly I would say in the 60s and 70s, the company became a sort of really important independent literary publisher, both here and in the US. And Peter was known as something of a maverick. He would take on what you might call difficult books, and in translation, and bring them to the English-speaking audience. So I think it's fitting that this book is appearing on our 70th anniversary, and we've translated books from many languages. We have 10 Nobel Prize winners of literature on the list, but this is our first translation from Maltese. So it'll be an important addition to the library. It'll be up here alongside, just before Anais Nin and various other people, beginning with them. And we're looking forward to giving it a really good push in this country with a February publication date.
Can you tell us something about the story of this particular project, of the translation of the Exodus of the Storks? And I would be also very interested in the relation between yourselves as a publisher, the author, and the editor. So what kind of work went into the preparation of the final text that is being published?
Well, that is a question really for the book's editor, Simon Smith, who isn't here today. But he's worked for the firm a long time, and he's very sort of dedicated person, and he worked alongside Antonia Owen, our publisher, with, on the editing project from the translation. So it's a painstaking process, but with a book like this, where the tone, the tone of the narrator and his anger, his shifts of mood, the way it flows in and out of almost like a stream of consciousness, and then you're hit with real facts. All those transitions have to be sort of melded together in the edit to create the effect that the book had in Maltese, and it's hopefully will enjoy that sort of success as well because of that effort.
Of course, you have to refer, as you just did, to the content, to the story, to the narrative. But also there's a particular genre here involved in terms of having an autobiographical approach towards Walid's experience, but a wider experience of a whole people, with reverberations on the experience of a global phenomenon of migration to a certain extent. So how does this come into kind of your choice as publishers, but also as kind of positioning the text now within the UK market and possibly international, English readership market, having this particular narrative in hand, in front of you?
Well, what attracted us to it was this, as I say, this individual voice, this voice that very much echoes around the world today, with, everyone sort of is aware of the crisis of refugees, but also the long-term effects of the various diasporas and the feeling of alienation that comes across so well that even when the narrator is in Malta, is in a sort of place you'd expect to be sort of welcoming, he's finding conflict there too. So we want to present it as a book about deracination, alienation, and in that way it joins a lot of titles on our list that represent the outsider. So that is where we're going with it, and FMCM, who are handling the publicity, they're the best people here in the UK dealing with literature and translation, have specific targets, and obviously Palestinian interests here, literary interests, but we want to get to the widest audience possible, to get the reviews that we need to get it up there in the amongst bestsellers.
What would you say is the kind of level of interest in the UK readership, in the UK market for reading about the experience of the other, literature in translation in this sense?
Sorry, I missed the first part of that question.
Yeah, how would you assess the level of interest of the UK reading public in kind of exploring this, the experience of the other, as you describe it?
Yes,
through literature, of course.
Yeah, I think in the literary sense, it's to have something. We all know about the the news stories and the terrible disasters and people in boats getting drowned trying to get to the UK or to Italy, the desperation, the reality, and the sheer literary sort of power of the novel, should fire up people's imagination, I hope.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I turn to Walid now, because, of course, it's it must be a different experience looking at your work, not as you wrote it, but as it is being rewritten by the translator. But of course, it's the same experience that is being conveyed. So there's this kind of struggle with the language to try to convey what you wanted, what you intended in the original language. What's your reaction, first of all, to seeing your work being translated, that is shifting away from the language within which you wrote it into another language?
Thank you, Kaldon, and my sincere greetings to Nick. When I wrote this book, and perhaps this is something I reveal for the first time, when I started writing this book, I actually started writing it in my native language, in Arabic. Then at a certain point, I discovered what is the use, what is the wisdom of telling your story to yourself. I mean, I know it by heart. So I decided to tell my story to the Maltese. So when I wrote this book, I haven't even dreamt that it will find its way to other languages. I only wanted to tell my story to the Maltese. But suddenly I found out that the book has escaped out of my control. Mm-hmm. Suddenly, I mean, many countries asking for the translation of the book. And I really don't know what, I mean, it has been translated into many languages, and I don't know from what language they translated it. So when I was writing that book, I was completely convinced that it is untranslatable, because it's not the first book which speaks about the Palestinian melodrama. There are thousands, if not 10 of thousands books written, but this book was written in a different way, perhaps in I would say non-partial way, non-impartial way. I mean, there are my anger there is my feelings there is. That's why I thought nobody would dare to translate my feelings. I mean, an angry man. And there was a time that I also believed that Europe gave me its prize on the grounds that I am a broken man, sort of, and I'm a man who is afraid of his shadow, which actually I'm not afraid of my shadow. I am frightened to death of my shadow.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the title of the book is The Exodus of the Storks, and the reference to the storks is symbolic in the original, of course, and even here. It kind of represents the forced migration of Palestinians, out of their native land, across the world, in a way, away from their homeland. But when I was kind of, thinking about this kind of symbol, there is also now, this is a stork as well, leaving its motherland, and it's going elsewhere, finding different soil, let's say, finding a different land. it is also kind of a migrant in that way. Do you I mean, even the way you describe it, that like I have no control on the text, where it's going, on the book, where it's kind of, you know, meeting other people and meeting other experiences, especially since you've just described the kind of the original intention was to at least have an impact within the local scenario, to share your experience in Maltese with people who can read Maltese.
Exactly.
So there is this kind of like expansion of the.
Yes, the book is migratory per excellence. It's about migration, about identity, and the conflicts associated. I chose the Exodus. I chose it on purpose. I know it's a biblical word, and I know it has to do with the Jewish Exodus, actually. Yep. So I borrowed it on purpose, you know, because they did to us what others done to them, what others did to them. And I chose the Exodus. It's a migratory bird, but it's after a certain time it returns back.
Yes.
It returns back. So the title itself was not, coincidental, or yes. I had been very careful in choosing it, and what I did, I just reversed their story.
Yes.
Just reversed their story, but with fine details. Last night I was attending a discussion with Emmanuel Mafsoud, and the moderator asked him, do you think the writer has an obligation to write history? Is he a historian? I would love that I have been asked this question. Yes, the writer is a historian. He is the writer of the fine details of history. Because historians tell us the Ottoman Empire fell down in 1924, but doesn't tell you the fine details. The same thing they tell you the Andalusia or Grenada fell in 1550-something. But when you read the literature, you know, about what happened to the families on daily life, the fine details, how they were, for example, prevented from closing their doors, so that the authorities see what type of religion they practice inside. So these fine details, yes, this is the true history, not, I mean, the historian gives you the shell of what happened, but the fine details, yes, I wouldn't say the duty, but a good writer, yes, would document that for sure.
I think your claim that an author, through literature, intervenes in the writing of history is also a very strong political statement, because in the book you're constantly struggling with how Palestinians represent themselves, how the Arabs as a wider nation beyond the kind of the confines of specific boundaries try to define themselves. There is this kind of, you know, description of what is being told to the people who are listening to the radio during the 6-day war, and what is actually happening, and just switching one channel to the other, finding completely different narratives. But and the trauma that I believe in the book is the father who is listening to the radio, and like his facial expression, you know, changes because of this change in the narrative.
Exactly. That period of Arab history, I would describe it as a black comedy, you know. During the 1967 war, they were telling us we have driven them out of everywhere, you know. And they were discussing what to do with those people who ended up in this territory. But then we discovered from the BBC that the opposite was happening. And this, I mean, in this novel I described the unspeakable disappointment and the breakdown of the father in the house to the extent that he takes the radio and crash it, you know, and I mean, that period I have witnessed it either at home or, I mean, through what my colleagues have narrated, and I mean, perhaps, yes, I took some personal details, but because I was quite sure that these details were happening in every house in Amman at that time.
Mm-hmm. There is, you are referring to the father here, and of course the book opens with the death of the father, but then the father remains present throughout. Father, yes. And I'll come back to this presence, you know, later on. But and there's the family, the brothers and the sisters, which are also really important. Not just characters within the novel, but you know, they are aspects of the trauma, of the experience.
There is very evidently a conflict between the father and the son, or let's say between the generation which they lost everything. They lost the land, they lost the battle, they lost the honor, and they lost the means to communicate with their sons. Mm-hmm. So I think I described that in the narrator says that after that defeat, his father never held him, never kissed him, never looked at him as a child. He even saw in him a curse that because he was born on the same. On the same. And a lot of people think that it is me who was born that it's not true. I was born before the eruption of the conflict, 1 year before. So all what I have narrated, I have witnessed later. I have witnessed the gap which has formed between the fathers and the other generations. It's like that the fathers, who are the losers, sort of blamed the sons for this loss. And the sons, of course, grew up, and I am one of them, pretty confused. I mean, whose fault? Why did this happen? And why this loss was so gross? I mean, Israel, which at that time was a newborn, a newborn. In 48 was a newborn, maybe it was a child. In 67, and they said they will throw it away in the sea. But suddenly Israel became 4 times more than it was before. Yeah. Yeah. So this is, I think, the most humiliating defeat in the modern history. So we, the generation which inherited this humiliating defeat, we were somehow asked to clean all this rubble. Yeah. So you can imagine, I mean, this can also contribute to the damaged character of an Arab. I mean, if you look in the eyes of an Arab, you see something broken. Something, I can see it very well because I am one of them. I can see it very well. From the first look, I can distinguish an Arab man among a million other men, because there is that something broken in our eyes.
In a way, the difficulty, almost the impossibility at a certain point then, that the older generation face in communicating with the younger one is reflected the other way around. And you state this in the book when you say, I don't want to do like my brother. I don't want to kind of pretend that I know what my father was, thought, wanted. And there is this kind of distancing that happens, gradually, but then at a certain point it becomes, the bridge becomes impossible to cross the other way, to understand what happened. And of course, the more time passes from these kind of historical milestones, the more difficult it becomes for, let's say, younger generations to understand what happened. But there's, at the same time, there is also this process of remembering through narrative, through telling of stories, and you yourself went through this kind of process of exploration of your own past to build the narrative here. Can you maybe tell us a bit more about that, about your research in a way, but it's also like a self-exploration, no?
Exactly. It's also about a man who trying to escape his past, but past is not a concept or not something you leave behind, like, you know, a shell of a snail or something, and that's it. Your past is actually inside you. I mean, wherever you go, you will have to carry it. You carry it with you. So the main conflict at that region, I mean, speaking in the same context between the gap of generations, that the generation which lost didn't have explanation, could not explain what happened, and the next generation could not understand what happened. So the gap even became further. Also because they did not want to admit that what happened, because there was things terribly wrong happening. They never not only admitted that, they never addressed that. They never addressed that until late. I mean, until Nasser passed away and his successors and those who led to this mess. After that, yes, there has been some analysis of what happened, and the analysis itself is horrible. Yeah. It's horrible. I mean, sort of the general leader of Arab armies, you know, at the night of the attack, he was spending the night with a dancer, Egyptian belly dancer, you know, on the night of attack, imagine. So the facts which were revealed afterwards were perhaps beyond imagination.
And explain some things.
Yes, this explains this big loss. Yeah. I mean, the Arab region never recovered until this moment from that defeat.
Coming closer, when you published the book the first time, there is a statement, I believe at the end of the book, which says the bulk of this book was written before the start of the Arab Spring.
Yes.
So and while rereading it now, I was like kind of reading it through the experience of the past 10 years, let's say, no, of the past 7-8 years. Now it is being published internationally, and a lot of things have happened in the last few years. A lot of things have happened, but I'm not sure whether anything has changed, and I would like to have your opinion on this. Do you see, is it as relevant, as fresh in terms of representing the present as it was when it was published in the Maltese? Have things changed to a certain extent that makes this already a historical document, or do you see it still as kind of, you know, addressing the open wounds and addressing the open issues and yeah?
Okay, a lot of things happened, but whatever happens in the world, the Palestinians lose somehow. What happened in the Arab Spring, you know, at the beginning it was something, you know, something joyful, something historical. But you know, the worst is not to deprive someone from something. The worst is when you give it to him for a while, then you take it away. So when the Arab spring erupted, we thought, wow, finally we will be like the rest of the populations of the world. But soon everything has been robbed in a devastating way. I mean, if you look at, let's start from the Far East, from Yemen, coming to Iraq, Syria, Egypt, Libya. I mean, sometimes I wish that nothing has happened. Some people at the beginning of the revolution in neighboring Libya, they told me, there will come a day you will cry for Gaddafi. And I almost told them bad words, you know, that anything on earth cannot be worse than this dictator. And unfortunately, the worst happened. The worst, and Libya now is a fractured, fragmented country, very, very difficult to stitch it back again. I don't know how many years they need, even though they are only 6 million, I mean, and they have enough money for everybody to be rich, you know. But it is a country, I saw it, torn apart. It needs decades to be stitched.
You make a reference at one point in the book to a number of Arab states as many Yugoslavias. That is, they were being held artificially together.
Yes, because Yugoslavia surprised us. I mean, I have lived in Yugoslavia. It was a federation, and there was a one country acting as a one country, but suddenly it erupted, you know, and civil wars erupted between and strangely enough, all the people of ex-Yugoslavia were married to each other, and they have kids from each other. I'm even talking about Muslims and non-Muslims. They were interconnected in an amazing way. But when you play on the nationalism, you know, and these all things, and yes, Yugoslavia shocked us, actually shocked us, not only in its separation, the way it separated very quickly, but on the blood which was associated with this separation. It was, yes, and then the same scenario happened in Iraq. I have always believed and thought that Iraq is a one united country. After the invasion of the Americans, Iraq now, it's a country also difficult to bandage. It's a very difficult country to bandage. I just came now just so that people died in Baghdad, and the division which also surprised us the same way Syria shocked us. So sometimes I think that those Arab countries, all Arab countries, like an old chair falling apart and being, you know, stick with a cheap glue. So with a big, the first big blow of wind, they just get fragmented.
No.
Can I just say something?
Yes, sure. Go ahead, Nick.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just wondered if it was possible for we were talking about the this sort of rather central scene and theme of the book where the Storks are on the move, and you know, it just reflects the quality of the writing that we have, and I just if it was possible, like to read a couple of paragraphs, if I may. Is that
Yes,
okay?
Sure.
Okay, so take my glasses off to read. So, one morning towards the end of November, we awoke and saw the sky over Amman teeming with storks. Hundreds, if not thousands, of the huge birds were darkening the sky high above us as they flew north. The scene reminded me of a verse in the Quran that describes how Allah sent mysterious birds to save the Kaaba from the elephants of the Abshamite king, Abraha al-Ashram, in the year 570, the year of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad. Allah will protect Al-Bat, said Al-Matalib, the Prophet's grandfather, when he received the news of the march of the ambitious king who, like Sharon, headed an army of 100,000 soldiers. The Quran says that Allah, with his mysterious birds, indeed saved his Al-Bat, the Kaaba. The emigrating Storks of Oman obviously had no intention of saving anything but their own feathers. In any case, it was too late to save anyone, especially in our house and in Beirut. That while the blood of my brothers and that of the refugees was still wet, we went up to the veranda to follow that incredible scene, which has remained in my memory as one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen in my life. When we got down from the roof, Omayama was curled up in her usual place in the yard, and you'd have thought she'd hardly noticed the racket or glanced up at the sky. When she saw us coming down, she tightened the scarf around her head and muttered under her breath, "Even the birds want to get away from the Arab world." I think that's wonderful writing. Thank you.
I think you had commented this particular section of the book.
Yes, we have described it. But by the way, this is a true scene. I mean, it's taken from my childhood memory.
Yeah.
It's a true scene.
Speaking of migration, there's a dimension of not just migration, but of transmigration, like of people dying, but then wanting to stay alive and reincarnating in someone else. And this experience of kind of re-experiencing what you went through, or what the narrator, what the protagonist goes through at a first instance, and then re-encountering it again at a later stage. You have the father who wants to kind of get reincarnated in the narrator. You have Halima who is kind of reincarnated in Nadia. You also have the whole experience of Palestine, or the way Palestine is imagined, which is re-encountered as Malta, in the book. So there are these kind of shifts happening, and it was interesting for me. I encountered an interview with you during your residency in Japan a few years ago, and at one point you used this phrase, "My Malta, my Palestine." Yes. And I would like you kind of to comment that, in the sense of how do you feel between these two identities, and how is that represented in the book? One has to read the book to kind of experience that. But yeah, I would like to have your kind of expansion on that.
To make, I give an example that many years ago I went back to Amman, which is the country of my birth and my childhood. And I did not find anyone waiting for me in the airport. So I sat down, on my luggage, and I looked far away. And suddenly I found my brother standing in front of me. I didn't even stand up to. I was in a situation. So he told me, "What are you doing there?" I told him, "I'm waiting for myself to arrive." So, in a way, yes, I mean, I came to see Malta as Palestine, not because of the similarities, and perhaps we have a lot in common. I mean, we have both been occupied by everybody on earth, the Greeks, the Romans, the English, the latest, the English. We have also a lot of in common in culture and food, and I think I would dare to liken the Maltese people to Christian Palestinians, to the Christian Palestinians. Exactly the same culture, the same way of behaving, the same enlightenment, I would say. Okay, I don't want to make certain social statements, but yes, I have to admit that Christians have been always a little bit further than Muslims. So I'm not Christian myself, but I feel today, after 32 years living among the Christians and celebrating their feasts, and I feel, yes, there is a part of me which is not small, is Christian. I mean, if not on a believing level, but culturally,
yes.
Whether I like it or not. And after that, I eat their food, I speak their language, I breathe the same air. So yes, part of me, whether I like it or not, and a big part is Christian. And there are other parts. I mean, I am made of, I don't know how many million fragments.
You mentioned the colonial past right now.
Yes.
And that kind of brings me to kind of my final question, which I would like to make to you and also to Nick. As a native speaker, you speak Arabic.
Yes.
Your native language is Arabic.
Yes.
You've written this in Maltese. At one point in the book itself, there's this provocation where you're asked, well, the protagonist is asked to write, to share the writing, and the protagonist says, like, what made this person think that I'm actually writing? And then you say, but writing in which language? In Arabic? No. In English, I'm familiar, but not so much. In Maltese, I'm still like a newborn in the language. But you end up writing in Maltese. And now there's this translation into English. And I was like, I saw a bit of irony there, because there's a lot of very direct addressing of the colonial inheritance, especially the British colonial inheritance in the book by a number of characters. How do you see now the book being, taken out of the Maltese language into the English language within this kind of post-colonial context?
Okay, before saying on colonial or post-colonial, when we received the news that the text, they liked it, I mean, we were in the members of the council. We just, the NASA people, when they get something on another planet, yes, I mean, Peter Owen it's a big publishing house. I mean, yes. This is something I have never dreamt of, and I know they have pushed writers to win the Book of Bookers and perhaps even Nobel. So, I would like to highlight that the British occupation of Palestine was different from Malta.
Yes.
It was different, perhaps for different strategic reasons. I mean, I don't need to go in these details, but despite the 30 years of British occupation of Malta, but they gave it the most precious thing on earth. Whatever they took from it, they gave it democracy. Mm-hmm. They gave it democracy, and this was not the case in Palestine. Mm-hmm. It was a different outcome. Mm-hmm. I mean, division of Palestine, it was the outcome. Before the British left Palestine, they took the case to the United Nations, and the United Nations divided Palestine, and Palestine at that time were not realistic. They did not know about what is real politique, which means take what is on the table, then ask for something more. So our leaders at that time, not the Palestinian leaders, because the Arab leaders, who we never had our own decision, unfortunately, they said no, either all of it or nothing. And this was the biggest mistake in the history of the tragedy of Palestine. It repeated itself again, and I mean the first attempt by the British to be fair to Palestinians was in 1936 of what is called the White Paper or Bill Paper, which offered Palestinians two-thirds of historical Palestine, but the Arab leaders rejected it. Yes, I think, yes, from there, all the big mistakes continued until now. We are fighting for, believe me, less than 20% of historical Palestine. And in that 20% of historical Palestine, we have almost 800,000 guest settlers. I mean, they are not guests, they are there to stay.
So does the interconnection between the language on the personal, on the political, and on the macro geopolitical level? How do you see this, Nick, in terms of translating an author that is writing in Maltese in the original, but of course with a very strong, well, not very strong, but with a Palestinian identity, and with all the baggage that brings into the literature and into the narrative and the experience?
Sorry, could you? I couldn't hear the last part of your question.
From the point of view of the publisher, of yourselves,
yes.
How do you see this interconnection between the language, the historical context that this is coming from, and specifically for the publication of this book, the relation between the Maltese original language, but then the cultural baggage that is coming into the narrative, which is Palestinian?
Yes, I think it's made the transition well, and I think that with the English translation of the book out there, hopefully there will be many other editions coming out of European publishers that are picking it up from and translating from the English into Danish or what have you. So I mean, I think that's a very, very important element, and we look forward to talking further about all that with Walid when we host him when he comes to the UK early next year. If he can stop working for 5 minutes.
Okay, I think we've come to the end of our session here. I've been told that for those of you who have joined us here, we will have a complimentary copy of the book here for you, which I think Walid would be very happy to sign for you as well. So thank you very much. I thank Nick and for joining us. It's been a real pleasure having you, Nick, and thanks again for engaging with this work and taking it,
Yes, it's just a shame I couldn't be there in person, but it's my pleasure to talk with you guys this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you. I would like to thank the translator who couldn't be with us today, Albert Gatt. Without him, this work wouldn't have been possible.